Hello, this is Victor Davis Hanson for the Daily Signal. This past week was June 6th, 2026. That's the 82nd anniversary of the D-Day landings in World War II that took place on June 6th, 1944. It was the largest amphibious invasion since Xerxes' invasion of Greece. It might have been much larger even. Some 300,000 British, Canadian, and American troops landed on 5 beaches in Normandy. Probably about 150,000 on the land and over 160 various naval personnel, airborne personnel. On that single day, over 10,000 British, American, and Canadian troops were wounded or missing or killed. 4,400 we know Americans. 4,400 were dead on all Allied armies. Probably most of those were Americans. What was the strategy behind it? The Russians had been pressuring us for a second front. Remember that Stalin had been in league with Hitler since August 23rd of 1939, and that devilish, diabolical relationship had benefited both sides until Hitler turned on Stalin on June 22nd, 1941, and then Stalin all of a sudden became our friend and wanted help. And at war's end, it is true the Red Army, the Russian Soviet Red Army, killed 3 out of 4 German soldiers. That's where most of the bloodletting was. 20 million Russians died on the Eastern Front, probably 5 million, 3 to 5 million, we don't really know the exact totals, of Germans were killed there. But Stalin felt that if the United States had a second front, that is, they landed on the beaches of France, then Germany would have a 2-front war. That was the strategy. The problem was that the United States, once Hitler declared war on us, and we then declared war back on December 11th, just a few days after Pearl Harbor, we were in no position to fight a European war. Our army was the 19th largest in the world. Portuguese had a bigger army than we did. We were in rapid mobilization and rearming. The British knew that, the Russians knew that. But the problem was we were very confident that we, to end wars, would go straight to Berlin, no fooling around in peripheral theaters. So George Marshall, the Army Chief of Staff, demanded that in 1942 or early 43 we land on the beaches of France and go straight to Berlin. We were not capable of doing that. To do that, you had to have absolute air superiority. We did not have that. You would have had to have absolute naval superiority in 42. We did not quite have that. More important, we didn't have veteran troops. The people who were stationed in France on D-Day turned out to be some of the most vicious infantry and panzer divisions in World War II. Panzer Lehr Division, Das Reich Division. They had a lurid history, 2nd and 3rd Panzer Divisions in Russia, of committing atrocities, but also being very well equipped with Panther and Tiger tanks, close air support, very deadly. So we were not up to that. The thinking was we had landed 2 million troops in World War I on the beaches of France and the ports of France, and we thought we didn't lose more than 50 in the transit, so said we'll just do the same thing and go right to the German border. But of course, France wasn't occupied in World War I. It was in World War II. So we had to get on the beaches and then form an army and then not be pushed off as the British had been in Dunkirk. Churchill was against the idea because he said we were surrounded on Dunkirk and we had to evacuate over 300,000 troops. We almost lost our entire army. It's very deadly, dangerous to have an amphibious landing against crack veteran German troops. Nonetheless, we decided then to hit the periphery of the German Third Reich. So we, in November of 1942, landed in North Africa. The next summer in Sicily and Italy, and we gained enormous experience in amphibious landing. So some of those commanders, many of those troops, were the veterans that helped school us, along with the British, who had been fighting the Germans much longer, to land on D-Day. So the idea was we were going to have 5 beaches. Gold and Sword would be the British, Juno would be the Canadian, and we would have 2, the Americans, Utah and Omaha Beach. It's not the closest route from England across this channel to France. It would have been better to land at Calais, but of course the Germans were expecting that, and they had fortified it heavily. Normandy was a huge beach, 50 miles long. It gave us chances to spread out. We would not be confined to a peninsula and cut off. It was pretty good ground for armor, and the idea was we could take off to Paris, and we might be there in a week or 2. It was a great success and in some ways a failure. The first day, the British and Canadian beaches were very lightly defended in comparison with the Americans. It had high cliffs, and the wind had blown the Americans off course. The seas were rougher. Many of our tanks that were supposedly floatable sank. We didn't have the ability to knock out German artillery and machine guns on the first day, and more than half the casualties and fatalities on the entire D-Day were at Omaha Beach. Nonetheless, in a series of waves, pretty young kids that had no prior battle experience, 18 and 19, charged right off the beach, right across it, and eventually up over the seawall and captured Germans. And by the end of the day, they had in their possession Utah and Omaha Beach, and the British and the Canadians had made a successful landing. Part of our luck was that Erwin Rommel, who had the tactical command under von Rundstedt of the German defenses, was not allowed to release the Panzer or the armor divisions. Hitler only could make that decision, and we had a lot of very successful decoy operations, intelligence operations to fool the Germans into thinking we were going up to Calais, and the result was he did not release enough German armor to push us off. However, we really didn't break out from June 6 all the way to the end of July. We found, the Americans in particular, that the land on the other side of the beaches was what we call hedgerow or bocage, thick, dense brush with 1 acre tiny little fields, perfect cover for German machine gunners and mortar teams. And that took a lot of casualties. By the time we 6 to 8 weeks later, finally got all of the armies united, and we had reached the major cities of Caen and St. Lo, and we were ready to break out. We had lost about 80,000 casualties. And we only broke out because finally the U.S. Army Air Force had to come in and bomb the German army with heavy B-24 and B-27 bombers and blast a corridor. And of course, one of the tragedies of the entire campaign was that George S. Patton, the most gifted of all American generals in the field, had been under discipline for slapping 2 soldiers. 2 occasions he slapped soldiers who he felt were dogging it. One was sick, one was suffering from shell shock, so to speak. And he was reprimanded, and for 1 year he was relieved of active command in the field, and he was stationed in Britain as a decoy. Army Group Patton, the Germans thought, wherever he went, the actual invasion would occur, and he stayed in England, and so they didn't commit fully their troops to Normandy, thinking Patton would go to Calais. But there was an irony to it. The ground commander on D-Day was, the overall commander was Dwight Eisenhower, in charge of naval, air, and land. But the ground commander was Bernard Montgomery. He was not a thruster. He was not an aggressive commander. He was brilliant on defense, as El Alamein had showed. But we didn't have a George Patton. Had we had a George Patton in the month of June and the month of July, I think we could have lessened casualties. When he was finally deployed with the Third Army, he broke out at Falaise and the Falaise Gap, so to speak, and for a month he was traveling at 50 miles an hour eastward toward Germany. Finally, what was the notion of about after D-Day occurred? It became iconicized because it was an emblematic of fresh troops, as I said, up against some crack Germans. There was a lot of Soviet prisoners who were given a chance to fight and save their lives, and they were not reliable troops. But very quickly, in the weeks after D-Day, some of the best German divisions were on their way into Normandy. And what was quite stunning was the Americans fought extremely well, just as well as the British and sometimes better. And they ground down the Germans. They had superior air, superior naval support. And I'll leave you with this tidbit. It's maybe an unfair comparison, but the distance from Omaha Beach to Berlin was a little over 600 miles. On June 6, 1944, the Russian army was about 650 or 700 miles from Berlin. And it had not moved since 1941. And you could make the argument that the Americans had to land on the beach, had to be supplied 100% by amphibious landings on the beach or the Mulberry artificial harbors, or maybe they waited at least 2 months before Cherbourg, Brest, some of the ports that had been mined and defended and blown up were usable. And yet the Americans got to Berlin, just right outside of Berlin at the Elbe River, about the same time the Soviets did. It was a stunning achievement to land in June 6, 1944, and to be across the Rhine and receive the surrender of all Western troops in the German army on May 9th and 10th, less than a year earlier. So we were in Western Europe for less than a year. And we remember we had fought in North Africa, we had fought in Sicily, we had fought in Italy, we had fought in the Pacific, we had alone defeated Japan with the help of the British. And so people keep saying the Red Army won World War II. The Red Army did one thing: it destroyed German soldiers on a land warfare. It did not have a strategic bombing campaign. It did not have a naval campaign. It did not fight the Italians. It did not fight the Japanese to the last 2 years of the war. So the American achievement, we should all remember today, was quite stunning. And we all are the inheritors of a free and prosperous and secure United States, in part because of those young kids that went out of the landing craft, charged at Omaha Beach, and suffered in some cases 90% casualties of their company. Thank you very much. This is Victor Davis Hanson for the Daily Signal. Thank you for tuning in to the Daily Signal. Please like, share, and subscribe to be notified for more content like this. You can also check out my own website at victorhanson.com and subscribe for exclusive features in addition.